Dr. Paul Allen. He will be speaking about his impressions on Nicaragua. Dr. Allen spent several months there in 1985 and 1986.
Thanks all to each one of you for coming. Hear something about a cause and a people that I think will become evident is very close to me, to my heart. We're not going to start with things of the heart, however. I would like to start straight out with some informational things to kind of set the scene. You can't help but pick up certain basic lessons. They're very obvious when you live for several months in Nicaragua, or less perhaps, when you travel through Guatemala and Honduras and other parts of Central America as I did. Here are some of the most obvious lessons, I believe. Number one. So we begin with some root informational things, and we'll switch later to more personal experience things. The root problem in Central America, I'm convinced, is oppression, is injustice, which is put on many, many poor people by many, many, or few sometimes, rich people who are operating out of a colonialistic mentality, our colonialistic economic systems mentality. It is not a Soviet threat, the primary problem, as Reagan would have us believe. Number two, the consequent unrest that exists there in Central America cannot be resolved by any military means. Number three, in Nicaragua specifically now, since the revolution of '79, the quality of life has been clearly improved, for the poor especially, who comprise 80 or 90% of the population. Health care, education, housing, grassroots political participation, basic freedoms are progressing despite a long, drawn, protracted war before and after the revolution. Number four, despite the fact that this is a country at war, it does not give one a sense of being a totalitarian state or a police state. There's no aura or environment of that at all. The military personnel interact very personally with the people. And the people are alive and spirited, and they aren't broken people. They aren't like Somoza once said he wanted oxen. We want our people to be oxen. This was the leader prior to the revolution. Number five, the U.S. financed Contra, on the other hand, the Contra, who we supply with money, as you know, regularly continue senseless attacks on the Nicaraguan civilian population. Farmers, villages, schools, co-ops, health centers, etc. Their goal and their tactic is clearly fear and disruption. There were 2,000 refugees fleeing from contra-terrorism who camped on the outskirts of the village out of which I worked. They told me stories pretty regularly that blew me away, that illustrate, number one, it illustrates that we human beings are capable of atrocious, unbelievable inhumanities to one another. And it also taught me that when one is overwhelmed by these kinds of things, as indeed I was, you must either back away and hide somewhere, or you must turn to God in prayer and hope, as these people do, and push on. Number six, U.S. policy in Nicaragua is counterproductive. It is forcing the Nicaraguan people to turn more to the Soviet bloc, not only for war items, for their defense, but for economic existence, for our economic boycott, and not only the war that we supply through our Contra mercenaries kills the innocent poor. The boycott is doing as good a job as the war. Number seven, in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, on the other hand, countries that we still control, democracy there appears, I had less time there, more form than substance. A constant military presence keeps many people, as I said earlier, like their leaders wish, like oxen. And outside interests and a few rich people seem to own and run these countries. Now, if all this is true, these 7 things that I just listed, Why are there so many contrary reports, you must be asking? Why is it that the State Department is saying what it says? And why aren't our daily newspapers and our radios and TV broadcasts regularly reporting what I depicted as obvious? And what about the testimony of certain high-ranking church leaders in Nicaragua? Why don't they see what I said is obvious? Well, I don't really like to say what I'm going to say in this regard, but I do so prompted by very vivid memories yet of people's faces and wounds and scars and tears and moans and lifeless bodies. And what some people may call respect for authority may be just lack of compassion, or a cowardly retreat from the difficulty of facing up to something that stinks, and stinks badly. So I think I'd like to ask God to forgive us of our sins of timidity and our sins of respect and our sins of obedience. So here goes. Under our present administration, the news releases regarding Nicaragua regularly deceive or attempt to deceive the American public, including the largely gullible press, with lies, misinformation, selective information, and exaggeration. When someone in the embassy attempts the truth, too much truth, they are relocated or dismissed. This administration has a concept of national interest or national security which demands our economic control over other people's. Now that's fine maybe, except that much like we discovered at Watergate, it justifies doing whatever we must do, including the illegal and the immoral sometimes, in order to achieve this economic control. And unfortunately, this also has direct and destructive consequences for other people. While we, especially our corporations and our stockholders of those corporations, reap great benefits, and while those elite patsies who are put in power by us or who are kept in power by us also reap a lot, the little fry, the little folks suffer and die or live inhumanly. So the Nicaraguan people, after 40 years of American-sponsored dictatorship, through a bloody revolutionary war, succeeded in throwing out a particularly tyrannical brute, Somoza. And FDR said, the grandfather of the man that was finally removed, three generations of Somoza leaders, Somoza is a son of a bitch, but at least he's our son of a bitch, end of quote. We supported him, in other words, despite his crimes, to the very end. Now this revolution wanted to give the resources of the country to the people, to the poor people also, not just to a few people. And we were expecting, I guess, just a simple change of guard from one dictator to another. A party representative of over 2/3 of the people of Nicaragua, the FSLN or Sandinistas, helped steer things in this people-orientated direction. Now, there was clearly some Marxist philosophy expressed by some of the revolutionaries, and generations of capitalistic tyranny will do that. The main philosophy is clearly an awakened Christian consciousness known as liberation theology, with its themes of social justice and preferential option for the poor and victims for the voiceless, voices for the victims. These kinds of ideas were basic. However, this could not be. Social justice, you see, is a nice theory, but it's only a theory. And business is business. And we have our country's security to worry about, or maybe we should put it, our corporations' profits to worry about. And so the struggle was on. And in this struggle, the pen is as mighty as the sword. The Reagan administration has to convince the American public, or at least it has to convince the American Congress, of the benefits of continuing his policy, its policy, make them cry uncle. For if one revolution succeeds, you see, the disease may spread. And the real fear is the Nicaraguan success story, which others will witness and want some of the same thing for themselves. So what does Reagan do? He barrages us with paranoia and fear, employing whatever misinformation campaign he can get away with. We're going to be more specific in a moment, to color the enemy red. That is evil. The Russians are coming through Nicaragua. And it is not so. It is simply not so. There's lots of gringos, lots of witness for peace people who testify the same thing. 2,000 have been there, and 2,000 come back seeing and saying basically the same thing. The Russians are not there. The Nicas want a decent human life. They don't want Marx. They don't want Russia. I think Reagan wants a Russian influence in Nicaragua more than anyone else. At least his policies appear that way, for he is forcing the Nicaraguans into a military posture to depend more and more upon the Soviet bloc so that he can justify, perhaps, militarily stomping out their quest for economic justice. Story of a fable of children, I guess. Emperor Reagan, in his clever tailors, in his obliging attendants, still parading the same naked rationalization, communism, for embarrassing game called economic control. Now, you may say it's a game, but the horror of this game, the horror of it is that as a result of this con job, people, simple, beautiful, ordinary people, are tortured and starved. Have you ever seen with your own eyes what those words mean? Are tortured and are starved. Today, right now, every day. So what specifically can we say? What kind of lies does the Reagan administration depend upon? What kind of phony persuasion does it use? Back to Nicaragua. Lie. Quote. The Nicaraguan armed opposition, that is the Contra, attacked very few economic targets and have sought to avoid civilian casualties. End of quote from State Department Resource Paper, April of '85. Fact. I can only shake my head in total disbelief. Dozens of people I know, and myself, who worked in other parts of the country, can only say this is a lie. It's not a mistake, it's a lie. Witness for Peace documents, here's one of them, every 6 or 8 months, all the human rights violations that they come in contact with, and send those into the Congress, send those to the State Department. There's mounds of documentation to prove that there are lots of civilian casualties, and the Contra attack lots of economic targets, regularly. Lie. The Contra leaders are without exception men who oppose Somoza. The Contras are our brothers. These freedom fighters are the moral equivalents of our founding fathers. Ronald Reagan, March 2nd, 1985. Fact. 46 of the 48 leadership positions of the Contra are held by ex-National Guardsmen, Somoza's goons. And the Contra foot soldiers, the recruits, many times, you know how they get the recruits? Quotes. Many times by assembling all the residents of an unprotected Nicaraguan town and proceeding to kill in full view of the others all persons suspected of working for the Nicaraguan government, including health workers and teachers and farm cooperative workers. Testimony before the International Court of Justice on September 5th, 1985. Now, I took personal testimony. Part of our job was to go get these testimonials from people when there was a violence in a particular area. And when a person is sequestered, kidnapped by the Contra, and then sometimes escapes during a conflict or something, we went and contacted those people and tried to find their story, and they said the same thing regularly. They also spoke regularly about the bribery that exists. If you're starving, a gun and some boots and some clothes and some food is a mighty big temptation. And that's why there are Contra fighters, rank and file fighters, in many cases. However, this does not make for an effective fighting unit. And that's why the Contra fight so few and win so few skirmishes against the Nicaraguan army, which is a dedicated army. Lie. Let us be clear. We do not seek the overthrow of the government of Nicaragua. Ronald Reagan, April 27, 1983. We are not engaged in acts of war against anybody. In fact, it was most clear, even to the far right, Senator Barry Goldwater, in a letter to CIA William Casey, the director of the CIA, "Damn it, Bill, the mining of Nicaraguan harbors is an act of war. For the life of me, I don't see how we're going to explain it." The day before, or the day after, Caspar Weinberger had said, quote, "The United States is not mining the harbors of Nicaragua." American law and international law, including a full-scale examination of the issue by the International Court of Justice, directly state the illegality of our actions against a legitimate sovereign state. Of course, we don't listen to or abide by court decisions that we don't agree with. Finally, on February 19, 1986, Larry Speakes admits, "Yes, to be absolutely frank, we are out to overthrow the Sandinistas." End of quote. In other words, yes, okay, our country does admit to subversive terrorism. We are willing to break the law to accomplish our goals. Lie. The Nicaraguan government is a totalitarian jungle. Nicaraguan country is a totalitarian jungle, hijacked by a small band of communists. Ronald Reagan, August 7th, 1984. Response. I daily observed the exact opposite. For a whole month after my stint with Witness for Peace, I hitchhiked from one end of the country to the other just to talk with people, to get the opinions of people, common people in comedores, restaurants and marketplaces and crossroads and bus stops, and they all said, not all, 9 out of 10 at least said, same thing. The present government, we laud it for its accomplishments and its efforts. It has some problems, it makes some errors, but we are behind it. We'll examine later some of the errors and problems. Another kind of lie. A few days before a vote on the Contra aid, a news flash from the State Department was reported as Nicaraguan army invades Honduras. Now, here's the response. For 2 or 3 years, I was only 3 kilometers from Honduras, in Somotillo, for 2.5 months. Nicaraguan patrols were regularly chasing marauding bands of Contra who had their base camps in Honduras and came into Nicaragua, chased them back into Honduras. They were doing that regularly. So it's a deceiving headline, but it was timed right, and it was obligingly splashed by all the newspapers, and it accomplished its purpose. What does the word invasion mean to you, connote to you? This became clear days or weeks later. Another headline lie. Possible MiG spotted on Corinto dock. Although the word possible is included, and the State Department's speculation was later proven inaccurate, the psychological goal, scaring people, had been achieved. Apparently most news services are willing to publish anything that comes out of the White House or the State Department, especially if it's sensational without any kind of need for verification. Apparently also our government knows that if it repeats even the grossest of lies often enough people will not care or will not know, so that the administration can continue to do what it wishes. And to this end, therefore, Witness for Peace has dedicated itself to bringing U.S. citizens to Nicaragua. I hope I can talk you into it later on, going yourself, on short-term delegations or long-term volunteer stints, too, to learn the truth. And this has been a real thorn in Reagan's paw. U.S. citizens go there in order to see the truth, and they come back in order to speak it. And so, that's why I'm glad to be here this evening, asking God to help me clarify for you this sinful truth, that our nation is systematically oppressing other people, using as an excuse communism. Our nation is systematically oppressing other people, using communism as our excuse. Mammon, money, security is our God, and we are willing to sacrifice our brothers and sisters' lives to this God, human sacrifice. In agreement with this statement, over 200 religious leaders, bishops like Bishop Dingman of Des Moines, Sister Susan Seitz, who's head of the Franciscan order here in Dubuque, President of Maryknoll, rabbis, nationally known theologians, presidents of seminaries, Methodist and Episcopal bishops, Baptists, Mennonites, all these people together released a statement last March entitled, "In the name of God, stop the lies and stop the killing." And I'm proud of that kind of outspoken religious leadership. Finally, Christianity is reclaiming its heritage of advocacy for the oppressed. Here's a brief quote from their statement. A scaffold of deception is being constructed around Nicaragua. Exaggeration, misinformation, and outright falsehood form the heart of the Reagan administration's case against Nicaragua. The purpose of the government's distortion campaign is to prepare the American people for further U.S. military action in Nicaragua. We in the religious community, therefore, feel compelled to speak out now about Nicaragua before many more lives are lost. We refuse to allow the deception to go unchallenged, or to accept the senseless violence that is deception's companion. Therefore we say, in the name of God, stop the lies and stop the killing. For many centuries, the general, the governor, and the bishop all stood in a row, keeping their people submissive. Maybe their paternalistic behavior was not malicious. Maybe it wasn't even consciously chosen. But human dignity and human freedom was squelched under this kind of domination. Now, the Nicaraguan Revolution, based on people's participation and input, and most religious leaders welcome and encourage that, a church where there is shared responsibility and community with the people, but others fear the loss of unilateral and complete control, and they want to share nothing. And maybe life is just seen differently. You see, when you live as an ecclesiastical aristocrat in a very comfortable home in a very large city far away from the war. Maybe these men don't know their people. They don't live like them. They don't live with them. And maybe they become frightened and anxious that their sovereignty won't be duly recognized, or that things will get, quotes, out of control. Every parent experiences the same thing as their children move through adolescence towards adulthood. So those who have attempted to retain a medieval church simply do not get along well with many parts of the Nicaraguan Revolution, whose overriding goal is to give to people dignity and voice. Bishop Vega spoke to us in Managua. He tried to convince us, first of all, that the truth was in the U.S. newspapers. Why do you come down here for the truth? He said, it's in your newspapers. He didn't know, perhaps, that some of us were living in the war zones and the countryside. His support for the Contra is simply unconscionable. I mean, I just can't imagine how he can do it. Maybe his dedication to the principle of his own authority has allowed him to lose sight of the reality and suffering of his people. I can understand, however, in one sense. Let's say you're an embassy official in your three-piece gray suit, surrounded by similar clones in the embassy. Or let's say you're a newspaper reporter working out of the Intercontinental Hotel, which is a real luxury, just like an island. Or a bishop, locked into a, however you wish, Your Excellency, atmosphere. Whether he wants it or not, that's what he gets. The truth for these people must be very difficult to ascertain, be very difficult to achieve. Only months of day-to-day living with the villagers, in the villages, as the villagers live, allows the truth and the beauty of these people to come clear. And I experienced just a touch of this. I don't mean 8 months. I mean like 14, 18 years, missionary people. But even a touch of it is like gold fever. It kind of pulls you back for more. You don't want to go back to learn so much, to help so much as to learn. The point isn't that you got so much to give, it's there's so much to get. A whole different way of being a human being, being a Christian. These are the people that my government wants to destroy and starve. Apart from Bishop Vega, however, shouldn't dwell on him too much, one or two others I'm sure, many other clergymen whom I met were just the opposite. The priest whom I worked with in Bocana de Paiwas was a blessing. To him, the church was not a business where he aspired to move up the ladder to something greater. His was an opportunity to serve, very strong word, very beautiful word, to serve the community. It was clear all the time. Moreover, he refused to create a little island of the United States in Nicaragua. Some bishops do this, and some missionaries even do this. his food, his sleeping quarters, his lifestyle, like Christ's, I'm sure, minimized the admitted differences between him and the campesinos, the peasants. And they understood and they appreciated his solidarity with them, and it was an obvious bond of love. See how these Christians love one another. Similarly, the Bloque, the block or group of parishes I worked with in a different part of Nicaragua earlier, same story. Christianity in action, love and service, not a power struggle. And the same thing with the political leaders. I didn't meet all the political leaders, but I met the vice president briefly for a couple of hours with Miguel Descoto, the Secretary of State, the foreign minister. Talk after talk after talk with a tiny boy-like man who was the jefe or the chief of our area, the county-wide area. This guy was popularly proclaimed and elected as the head. My conclusions were always the same. These men are dedicated to their people, to justice. That doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. They admit it. But they are for real, and they aren't power mongers, and they're in love with, and they're in touch with their people, and they're very humble. What more can you ask? The occasion on which I met the vice president, by the way, was at a memorial service of a friend of mine, Mauricio, and it's one personal story I really would like to tell. Mauricio and his wife, Chantal, were both Swiss, and were working in the same area I was, near Honduras in November and December of '85. More war had broken out in the country's middle, in the middle of the country, and the area around Somotillo was tranquilo, quiet. The Contra raids in the middle of the country were regular there, and the Believe battalions, it's the army, couldn't get there because the roads were, this was the monsoon season, the rain season, and couldn't get in there to protect the people, or at least only on occasion. Catholic Relief Services donated a brand new four-wheel drive ambulance, and they needed someone to drive it into the jungle war zone where these raids were occurring. And they said a U.S. citizen would be the best because apparently American life has more value than Nicaraguan life to a Contra for political reasons, obviously. You don't shoot Americans quite as readily or as fast. So I agreed to switch to this war zone to drive the ambulance and to take human rights documentation, violations documentation. And the pickup truck that I had been working with, that I had been driving in Somotillo, could be driven by somebody else. It delivered food and it provided transportation to elderly people, bringing them to prayer services and things. So off I went to Bucana de Paiwas, and Mauricio took over my job of driving the truck back in, quote, safe Somotillo. 2 weeks later, Mauricio was dead. He was killed by a claymore landmine in the main road just out of town. And he and 4 passengers of his who were women were chopped to ribbons by machine guns after the explosion. And some children who were covered with their bodies survived, but they were badly wounded. And in a letter to her Witness for Peace friends and others, Chantal, who is Mauricio's wife now, wrote something that I really want to share with you. It gets closer to the kind of thing that I really would like to talk about, but it's hard in a lot of ways. It's very difficult. And before quoting from Chantal, the most important things about Nicaragua I discovered, aren't explained very easily. I went down there saying, oh, there's politics and theology and economics and the Spanish language, and I'm interested and excited about all those things. And then I returned with a whole different set of lessons, which make the others pale. Things about mortality and humanity and power and God and humility and those kinds of things. Anyway, Chantal writes, quote, "There are moments in life that are absolutely unforeseeable and that cause us either to grow or to give up. One can never be prepared for such moments of testing and pain. When they told me that Mauricio had been killed, I felt a new space opening in me, something tremendous that split my body in two and expanded in me, and I understood that there where death is are also rebirth and resurrection." I felt it physically. I mean physically, and I can't express it any other way. I asked God not to let Mauricio go too far away, not leave me alone so soon, and from then on I felt a very deep peace, which filled me, which is always filling me when I think of Mauricio, my companion. And I understood also in that moment why the people of Nicaragua are prophetic. The prophetic person cannot be prophetic if he or she is not weak. Because if I am strong, I dominate people by myself, but if I am weak, God can use me. Experiencing my own weakness now helps me to discover the strength that I have. Precisely because the Nicaraguan people are weak, they too have an impressive strength, much more powerful than the powers of this world. Martyrs are called to purify us in the sense that they cause us to see what is essential and to put all our strength into that. End of quote. An even more personal note, something certainly less than, but similar to Chantal's experience, happened to me too. And let me try to explain. When one is stopped by an enemy contra, hostile enemy patrol, and the leader's eyes are dilated to pinpoints, you can tell that it's some drug and you don't know what he's going to do because he's out of it. Or when security tells you that you can drive the road if you must, but that we know that there are contra on it who are mining it and who are setting up ambushes, so you have to make your own decision. Or when in the middle of the night, the town turns into literally a nightmare of AK and M16 fire, small arms fire, and you don't know who's shooting at who or what's happening. Or when the mortars come thumping in every 10 or 15 minutes just from a different location so they can't track them, and your nose is already buried into the dirt as far as it can go. Or when the river is running a lot higher than it is safe to cross, but the other person in the ambulance is going to die if you don't cross, it doesn't make any difference to them, then there's something that changes. There's something that breaks free. There's something that goes click, for want of a better word. And it's a click that gives you more freedom and more peace and more acceptance. And life ceases to be a thing that you want to control or shape anymore. Let it flow. Stand up and be counted. You can kill my body, bud, but you can't kill me. Come what may, your will be done. Now that's a gift. None of us earns that. That's a gift. And it's the greatest gift a person can receive, that feeling, that attitude. And I was blessed with a tiny speck of that gift. And I want to continue to pursue it because it's nothing that you ever have, and I want to help others, anybody that's interested, to pursue it as well. There's lots of things that we read. We read about wars, not only this Nicaraguan war, about traffic accidents, victims of malnutrition. You've read about those things, and so have I. And it doesn't move us to do very much. The personal experience of all of us is, unfortunately, but inevitably limited and protected, and this makes the experiences of others very difficult to understand. So knowing this, I feel completely helpless in trying to explain my quick glimpse of Nicaraguan reality. You know why? Because you can't see and you can't remember the dark, brown, trusting, hopeful eyes of the Nicas. And you can't remember the thudding sound of the dirt filling the graves every week. And you can't smell the puke and the pus and the blood in the urine on the ambulance floor, and you haven't seen the empty, hollow, questioning, gaunt eyes of the refugee as they come streaming into the town, escaping the Contra? And you don't know Reina and Elmir and Anselmo and Gustavo and Mariano and Ernesto and Mina and Alberto and Presentacion and Juan Carlos? Those are only names, those aren't people. It certainly isn't heroic. You don't know they're heroic in their humbleness. And you haven't heard the Contra planes, supply planes flying real low, and the hush that it causes in the town and in the jungle before all the people open fire on it futilely with their AKs, their rifles. And I really want, and I think it's important to share those kinds of things, those kinds of experiences. But I know that I can't. I mean, I want to say it, but it can't be the same to hear it. And it's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. And I'm sorry for not trying harder, more often. And nobody's question is an intrusion. It's not like a question is out of line. But my answers just aren't satisfactory. That's the problem. You just can't explain some reality. That's the human condition. And I once thought that logic or force or beauty or organization of words, a lecture would mean something, would be important, would shape somebody's convictions. Now I'm beginning to understand a little bit that line from the Bible about how we plant and we cultivate, but God gives the increase. Does that make any sense? Let me say this. The pressure is off, not on. The pressure is off. It's very parallel to standing at the deathbed of your mother or your father. Now, what do I mean the pressure is off? Your presence there at the death of your mother and father or father is not dependent upon your ability to change the situation, to change the story. You are there simply because you want to show something. You want to say something. Because of your love, because of your relationship, period. Whether you can change anything or not is irrelevant, is immaterial. We assume, of course, that love tries to find answers and cures and remedies whenever it can. That's obvious. That's the first step. But the next step is to be present, calmly, and maybe even proudly, and maybe even joyfully, despite your pain. And to be present before those events, even horrendous events, that you know you cannot visibly alter. Simply being there is enough. It's everything sometimes. And let's let God worry about the increase stuff, the changes. So tonight I also want to add just a bit to present a better balance perhaps than what I've said so far. Some of the difficulties and some of the errors of the present Nicaraguan government. I'm not all for the Sandinistas. They make lots of mistakes. Back to maybe for a minute some more informational stuff. If we take a scale of 1 to 100, the Contras would clearly be 0. There's no question about that. But what about the efforts or the ideas of the present government, the Sandinista-led government? How successful or how correct have they been? Let me list some of their errors. Some political leaders of the Sandinista party and some officers of the Nicaraguan army are as bad as the Contra. And they are convicted and sentenced when charges of injustice or brutality are proven. They get 30 years prison as a normal term. But probably some of them get away with it. And Witness for Peace's human rights violations documentation lists these too. But they are less than 10%. 6, 7, 8% of the human rights violations in Nicaragua are being done by pro-government individuals. So there are some. Secondly, the draft, compulsory military service, tremendously unpopular. Remember, this is after 10 years of war. The draft is the cause of most peasant opposition to the government. Although the government, of course, sees it as militarily essential. And there's a lot more shooting going on down there than any of us knows. Thanks to us, it's going on. And most of the people, many people, simply want to escape it, hide from it, rather than fight in it. Number 3, compulsory relocation of people, moving them out of ceasefire or free, they call them fire-free zones, no man's land. It's a military decision which has created widespread opposition. The government did a very poor job, especially of moving about 10% of the Mosquito Indian tribe, in 1881 particularly, trying to make them comply and saying, no, we have to leave this valley because it's right here between Honduras and Nicaragua. And at that time, some of the Mosquitos did get imprisoned and did get killed because they fought back in resistance from being moved, and it's a bad scene. And another thing, fourthly, sometimes basic foods. Most of the time, lots of foods are not available. And you hear people blaming this onto the present Sandinista-led government. Frequently they complain and they understand at the same time. They say things like, when we had a dishonest government, we lived better. And now that we have an honest government, we are doing much worse. And some of the better off people next complain about restrictions on their rights to buy and sell things as they wish. One man told me this is a quote. Before the revolution, he said, if I had the money, I could walk into a store and buy all the corn grinders in that store. Now they tell me I only can buy one, only one per family. Why? He couldn't understand. He didn't like that at all. It was unjust to him. Next, after their successful revolution in 1881, the Nicaraguans did attempt to provide small arms weapons to the Salvadorian revolutionaries, the revolutionaries of El Salvador, across the Gulf of Fonseca, which separates the two countries. And this became quickly impossible, and it was not a wise decision in the face of the U.S. Opposition to it. And for about 5 years afterwards, Reagan uses this as his chief argument to Congress to give aid to the Contra, to destroy Nicaragua. But I'd like to key on what I think is the biggest mistake of the Nicaraguan government, and that is its unwillingness to butter up or to show proper respect to the United States and its leaders. Let me try to explain that. I think Corazon Aquino of the Philippine Islands is a good example, positive example of how you have to handle the United States. And I think Tomas Borge of Nicaragua is the reverse example, the worst example. If you don't brown-nose the boss, at least a little bit, so says the story, goes the story, you don't get very far. And so don't say exactly what you think, hedge, fudge. Perhaps compassion for the Nicaraguan campesino, the peasant, justifies a little flattery here and there, a little deceit even, perhaps. Don't confront, don't create a showdown because you're going to lose the United States. The Nicaraguan leaders have their pride, in my respect, but at the cost of the little people at the bottom, who pay the fiddler more than anyone when that arrogant boss to the north decides to make them all say uncle. And I'm afraid that Nicaragua will feel the U.S.'s full wrath before this story is over. Only later will we recognize how we had been manipulated, hoodwinked, through misinformation and disinformation. And I also admire, and I fear, I'm scared, about their reaction to it, to this inevitable, this coming invasion. I heard a so-called uneducated farmer, so-called uneducated, mind you, say this. Beautiful. Yes, Reagan's Marines will come, and from their ashes and ours will rise new life for Nicaragua. And maybe, too, the horror of what you do to us will awaken even you, and you, too, will rise from these ashes. Let me read that again. Yes, Reagan's Marines will come, and from their ashes and ours will rise new life for Nicaragua. And maybe, too, the horror of what you do to us will awaken even you, and you, too, will rise from these ashes. How persevering, how filled with faith, how long range these people are And I really miss that environment. I'd like to end with two quotes. The first is a statement from Father Mike Gilgannon, who was a U.S. missionary to Bolivia, entitled, "Let My People Go." And the other is a poetic letter addressed to us, the incoming long-term Witness for Peace team, in autumn of '85, a year ago, as a letter of welcome. So the first quote from "Let My People Go." "We see economic greed covered over with hypocritical appeals to anti-communism masquerading as patriotism. We Americans must take responsibility. If we want cheap coffee, bananas, tin, copper, then we get what we pay for. And we are paying for military dictators who make sure no campesinos organize themselves to get a fair price for the products of their labor. And we are paying for secret police who will torture any worker who tries to do what Samuel Gompers or John L. Lewis or George Meany did in the United States. Our government is teaching tyranny to tyrants and calling it anti-terrorism. Guatemalans, Peruvians, Brazilians, Nicaraguans want the right to be themselves. They do not want to be slaves of anybody, not of the Russians, not of the Chinese, not of the Americans. They want the right to make their own mistakes in their own path to maturity. And no one can stop this march of history. Let us think twice before attempting to repress the indomitable human quest for liberty and freedom. Communism is not the enemy in Latin America. Greed is. You theologians, intellectuals, professionals, teachers, where have you been? In universities and seminaries and schools and think tanks, in endless meetings and workshops, where have you been? Searching for your psyche, fundraising for personal or institutional survival? Not good enough. You are condemned by your silence. You must know better. You will not unmask the centers of power in your culture because you benefit from them. U.S. money and U.S. power sets the intellectual agenda, and the agenda is how to hold on to the money and the power. An agenda which, therefore, includes the best of technology and science put at the service of the military and police programs designed to crush the life out of the people all over Latin America. You Christian youth of the United States, you do not have to go to war to prove you are American. You have to question war to prove that you are Christian. Do not sell your faith or your freedom to maintain the antique shop called Western civilization. Do not suffocate your youth with consuming or conforming. Question: how can people of compassion and faith be at peace with themselves or their society, knowing what their comfort costs others? And finally, reading number 2, quote number 2, briefer, a letter of welcome to Witness for Peace in Nicaragua. Welcome to a community, individuals, almost sisters and brothers. This is the group I worked with when I was in Nicaragua. We argue, sing, sleep, laugh, eat, cry, together and apart. Oh, and we work. When you come, some of us will go, some will come back, some you will like, won't like, maybe fall in love with. Fíjate, imagine that. Welcome to an organization, young and vibrant, somewhat disorganized, will change radically as soon as you get here, far from perfect. Welcome to a country at war. Guns everywhere, tanks, soldiers, conscription, invasion scares, shortages, no hay. You go to a store and ask for something, no hay, there isn't any. Welcome to a third world country, shocking poverty. You will come to know diarrhea, sinus problems, head lice, yeast infections, foot fungus, fleas, weight loss, mosquitoes, sunburn, body odor, more diarrhea, constipation, maybe even hepatitis, malaria, pneumonia, tuberculosis. Privacy, exercise, toilet paper, vegetables, phones, good night's sleep? No. Welcome to Nicaragua. Espanol, both. Ranchero music, beans, corn, 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 courage, humility, generosity. History, machismo, mangoes, smiles, pilas, waiting, children. Sácame un foto, take a picture of me. Regálame un lapicero. Can I have a little bag to put my pencil in? Patience, waiting, birth, death, waiting, death, birth, waiting. See you soon. And I do hope to see them soon. To return, I mean, very possibly in May. And so, if anyone here, or a shirt of anyone here, or $1 of anyone here would like to go with, please let me know sometime between now and Christmas. I also have something that you might want to sign. It's a request called the Campaign of Conscience to Stop Aid. Even though it appears like it's going, we can still register our vote. Information about short-term delegations to Nicaragua with Witness for Peace, our long-term volunteer program, 8 months or more. And I'm also very happy right now, if we have time, to respond to or to listen to whatever questions or comments you have. Thank you much. Good night.
Good evening, and welcome to the first Founders Lecture event for the 1995-96 academic year. This series was created 12 years ago in honor of our distinguished founder, Bishop Matthias Loras, and the many master teachers and scholars who have been responsible for the tradition of academic excellence for which Loras College is known. For the past 156 years, Loras faculty have shared the excitement of learning and scholarship with thousands of students and members of the greater community. Tonight we hear from another who has forwarded that tradition. Paul Allen has served Loras College for nearly 30 years and is a professor in the Department of Religious Studies. He graduated from St. Paul's Seminary at Catholic University of America in 1961 and received a master's from Marquette. His doctoral work in ecumenical studies was done at Aquinas Institute of Theology where he received his doctorate in 1968. In the classroom, he addresses the themes of poverty and justice, liberation theology, and the third world in the church's social teaching. He is widely known for his full-time commitment to getting hands-on experience of the Christian commitment to combat social injustices. It has been said, and I quote, "When the world seems large and complex, we need to remember that the great world ideals all begin in some home neighborhood," end quote. Tonight, Dr. Allen will share his reflections and insights from his recent experiences in Guatemala and the efforts there of a people's struggle to retain culture and values in the midst of increased enticement towards consumerism. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Allen.
Thank you, Dr. Freelich. You know, this is a special occasion for me because I have a suit coat on. This is the third time in the last 12 years. My son got married, my father died, and tonight's lecture, so. I'm going to use a prepared text tonight, even though I'm not very familiar with that way of proceeding, because it has the advantage of getting a lot said, I think, in a relatively brief time. And I'm also not accustomed to including so much personal experience and testimony. So I feel a little bit naked because of that. But I think it's really essential. I think it's really important and relevant to this particular topic. What I want to do is not talk about myself, however, nor really do I want to talk about Guatemala. There's a lot of travelogues that would tell you a lot more than I could. What I'm really talking about is resistance. How we can stop being robbed of our humanness. And how the Guatemalan campesino really is a real helper in that regard, showing us the way. But then we have to find a way that is more appropriate to us, because we live in a middle-class first world, me first world I call it, with a lot of comfort and a lot of affluence. I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing the problem, because I think we understand the problem. The word materialism or consumerism doesn't need a lot of analysis, or doesn't need a lot of discussion. What we need, I believe, are some elements to be employed in combating the problem. There's the rub. I think there's a real common awareness of how we are being misled. And because it's so common, we get overwhelmed. We feel like, so what do you want me to do about it? What can I do about it? And that's what I would like to try to address. I don't have an answer, but that's where we want to work toward some suggestions or some compass points or a few ideas here and there. I see it as having three parts, what I'm going to say. After a brief warm-up or introduction, I want to talk first of all about Guatemala, because Guatemala is the inspiration and the example for this resistance. I want to talk about 5 components that I see as essential to the middle-class U.S. citizen doing some resistance in a way appropriate to us. And then I want to talk about my own struggle, some successes, a lot of doubts, some defeats, and trying to implement those in life. In life as a teacher, life here at Loras, life here in Dubuque. So let's give it a whirl. Let's try. On April 1st, 1995, I was returning to the United States from Guatemala. I checked in at the headquarters in Kansas City, headquarters of the program with which I had just finished working. There I happened upon a book subtitled The Spirituality of Cultural Resistance. It grabbed me because it summarized so well what my own experience had been telling me while in Guatemala, but also the last 30 years of teaching. So I borrowed the book for the summer, which I would be spending at a place called Su Casa. Su Casa is a home, a Catholic worker house for Guatemalan refugees who arrive here surviving torture victims, all of them, and try to apply for political asylum. So through the summer at Tsukasa, I read this book and I enjoyed its content. And its content kind of was the inspiration, I think, for tonight. Simply put, it asks, how do we stave off the dehumanization of consumerism? And how do we regain our depth and our wholeness as human beings to live more fully and completely as such? And perhaps even more importantly, what a really important question that particular question is. And maybe I should try to sell you on that assumption first. Someday, we will all face a great exam in the sky, you see, which I talk about in all my classes. In Matthew's 25th chapter, we are given the 6 questions that we will be asked, which test whether we have succeeded or failed as human beings, and thus pass or flunk that big exam. And on that day, God will not be asking any questions about doctrines and beliefs. Did you believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth? Did you believe in His Son, Jesus Christ? Did you believe in a one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Those aren't the questions. Those are important questions, but those aren't the ultimate questions. Nor about church going or sacraments. Which church, how often? And certainly not about sexual preference or income gained or 1,000 other things. If what those 6 bottom line questions are have slipped your mind, maybe we should talk later, but I'd be willing to give you a hint. A couple of them go like this: feed the hungry, give shelter to the homeless, visit the prisons. So if I could offer any little insight into how to get ready for that exam, into how to live more humanly or more Christ-like, if you, as I, prefer that way of putting it, any hint or reminder, even just some solidarity or friendship in the search, that would make me most happy. I don't have any magic formula, obviously. Not for myself, as you will see. Not for you, of course. What I see it as is kind of a crooked path that spirals its way upward, so that with each twist you get a little bit better view, vantage, vision, I hope. And that last word, hope, is a big one, as we will see. For now, on to Guatemala, early January 1995. Dirty, old, but well-patched bus blasting its way much too fast through the night from Chiapas to Guatemala City. 8 hours for sure, maybe more before we get through those mountains. And I'm too excited after the hassle of the border to get any sleep. Here I go again, Central America, the 12th or 13th time. But I didn't relish the return at this particular moment. I would be stuck looking for lodging in the toughest part of the city at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. Still on my agenda was San Antonio, Aguascalientes, Terminal Paroquial, and then a final bus to San Pedro, Ayampuc. That's the end of the line for the bus, and for me, my home for the next 3 or 4 months. San Pedro Ayampuc is a town of about 8,000, agrarian, mountainous. The people are shy, polite, poor, indigenous folks. A new territory for the program that I was going to work with, which asked people in the United States to sponsor Guatemalan kids at $20 a month, their education at $20 a month. The church was easy to find, smack dab in the middle of the town, on the plaza like any other town. And Padre Antonio was just as easy to find. He told me that a parish family had a room where I could sleep, and they had a barrel and a bucket I could bathe out of, an outhouse, and even a scrubbed sink where I could wash my clothes. A lot more luxury here than for the average person, I discovered, who had to walk miles or wait hours, can you believe that, for water. Not drinkable water, for water. My family had a well, so we were the town's rich. I could eat my meals at the rectory when I wished. There was a tiny office room that Vilma and Mayra, 2 parish workers, and I shared as we launched the sponsorship program. So this was the very real world now. Real hunger, real disease, real lack of education, real poverty, real water shortage, real suffering. And yet it was real good living, too, even for me. Now how could that be? While I did miss the comforts of a bathroom, or running water, or a place to sleep without a million mosquitoes, what I was bumping into that made life good, or even better than here in some ways, what was that? Why was I feeling good? And that's the point that I want to try to explain. First of all, for sure, it was the people. Chupito, Doña Soltera, Catorce, Ana Maria, Don Pedro, to name a few, who between endless cups of coffee and chunks of hard bread re-showed me the different way to live. I'm going to try a few cameos to explain the way it is in San Pedro. Chupito, cameo 1. Chupito is 82 years old. He is nearly blind, recognizing people only when his face is a foot or two from theirs. His 8x8 room is a pile of boxes, a bed, water bottles and pieces of tortilla and lime and egg scattered everywhere. He asks me to read him a chapter from The Imitation of Christ, which he will use in his talking with the people that evening. He and I wind our way up the steep dirt paths to a different home every day about 5 p.m. The people of the neighborhood are gathering for a vigilia, or prayer service. It is the evening social as well, with bread, coffee, and conversation always following, sometimes going late if there is a moon to get back home safely by. Just folks getting together each night to be with one another and with God. Cameo 2, Doña Soltera. Doña Soltera is no taller than about 4 feet. Lack of nutrition has taken the toll in other ways. She's probably only 45, but looks at least 60 or more. Still, her bare and splayed feet conquer with ease the narrow and steep paths of rock and dirt. En route to the old man's hut where we are headed this afternoon, she will say little, but entering, her soft voice comforts the family. I think he's going to die soon, Don Pablo, she had told me earlier. He came in by horse from Petaca, and the health center says they can't help him. But her presence and her prayers, as much as her aspirin, console the dying man, yet the pain is severe. Our next visit will be his funeral preparation. Later I'll see Doña kneeling in the aisle of the church, eyes fixed upward, seeking more help for him and for the many others like him. Cameo 3. I sit at a tiny table. There are nearly a dozen mothers in the room with me, at least 3 times that many small children accompanying them. I am writing up applications for this program, which provides shoes and books for kids so they can go to school. Some of the questions are strange to these people, framed in our U.S., not a Guatemalan mentality. What are the child's favorite pastimes and hobbies? Pastimes? Hobbies? How much money does the family earn each month? As if they get paid regularly like we do. The biggest delight, on the other hand, is this request. Would your child please draw a picture of your family in your home? Vilma has Crayolas, and there is this intense workshop atmosphere on the floor around us as kids scribble away happily. Sustenance later will take a photo of each child to be sent to their sponsor in the U.S. And that, too, is a big highlight, although it does keep some who are ashamed of their clothing away from entering the program. Cameo 4. Don Pedro wipes the sweat from his forehead and takes an adobe block from me. He sets it in place, picks up his trowel. The pail of mortar that I mixed has the fingerprints of a few of the dozen kids playing around us. It is Saturday, so we are in a neighborhood showing the people how to build a seta baena, which is a kind of primitive but efficient wood-burning stove, which vents the smoke outside at least, to reduce the bronchial problems which plague the Guatemalan women. Pedro's skill as a brick mason are evident, and we'll get done in half the time. I'll be glad if we can finish before the late afternoon heat. The main meal about 1 o'clock will interrupt us. Women scurry in a neighbor's kitchen, honoring us with the addition of a chicken to the normal vegetable soup, served, of course, with dozens of hot tortillas and a beverage made from tamarinda. This is life in the village. Slow-paced, friendly, always time to chat, little to prove, lots to appreciate. And slowly the hypothesis forms. The more isolate and more unaffected, therefore, the village is from the seduction, strong word, and attraction of the U.S., TV programming, advertising, influence, the more friendly and generous the people are. In the capital, there is the chaotic confusion of culture and conflict, with even a Chicago Bulls promotion agency in downtown Guatemala City. And many of the advantages, all of them maybe, of the first world, the me first world, abundantly available, if you can afford it. In this third world country, of course, very few can. But that's the capital. That's a westernized city. In San Pedro, however, and even more so in the smaller villages around it, it's not the same. Not at all. How and why are they different? Well, it seems we have the advantage of independence. Who our neighbors are is relatively unimportant in our lives, whereas they have the advantage of dependence, looking for and finding support from their neighbors, who know that they may be the one in need tomorrow. There is no security found in possessions. They are too few. There is more security in friendships, children, relatives. It is easy not to trust in bank accounts or pensions or insurance funds when you don't have any. So, they are either cheated by, or blessed with having to lean on one another and on God. We have more property, more profit, the legacy of our capitalism. But we also have more competition, rugged individualism, exploitation. It's all understandable, but sad, and it's less human. It feels less human. Given what they don't have, they are forced, we would say, to the alternative route of trusting in God and neighbor, dependency, faith, hope. This, however, is precisely the advantage of which the New Testament and the Church's social teaching so frequently speak. This is their advantage. Whereas, on the other hand, according to our shrewd and superior society, it's the disadvantage of these poor, less civilized peons. It would take a real radical reversal in their lives to turn them from relying on one another. And it would take an equally radical reversal to set us free from our reluctance to do so. But then there is this word, hope. We can still hope for the reversal, whereby little by little we escape the idolatry into which we've walked. Things can return to being mere things again, instead of the source of hope or security. If our confusion regarding what is really valuable could be reduced by some program of recovery of some kind, not only would we become more human, but it would also pave the way for their liberation and their wholeness too. For poverty is no blessing. Be most clear on that. It's getting one's fair share, not 4 times that amount, nor 1/4 of that amount. That is blessed, and that is humanizing. So, for the main part, how would we get turned around? What are the components or the ingredients of this reversal process? How can we of the first world express our cultural resistance? Well, in the search for our humanity, it seems there are 5 important components. Each is valuable, but also potentially disruptive, perhaps if it's not kept in balance or proportion like maybe ingredients in a cake. So I want to talk about them, first of all, rather objectively, and then as I've wrestled with them in my life. Component 1, studying and learning the truth, where we learn the importance of being human and what that consists of. How to apply the 6 questions that I spoke about earlier of the great final exam in the sky to the political and the economic systems of our times. And for me, this centered around the study of moral theology, social justice, comparative religion, liberation theology. These are liberal arts ideas that are found in lots of other studies or disciplines as well. And that's the goal of this college. And that's why I love being here. I call this learning about the poor, component 1. Component 2, being present to or living in contact with these poor, the marginated, the outcast, the voiceless, sharing in their suffering and in the beauty of their life. Compassion in action, service, lending a hand and getting those hands dirty, so that we are then able to start learning from them, their values, their perspective, their insights, their reactions, and their way of living. I call this component 2 learning from. Learning about, learning from. Component 3, lifestyle. Simplifying, economizing, ecologizing, reducing one's needs, trying to use only one's fair share. Relinquishment, downward mobility, living low on the ladder, thus having time and money to use for others. Being with or like the poor when we are at home, as well as when we are out volunteering somewhere. Living like the 2/3 world, at least a little bit, symbolically. Thus remembering, we hope, identifying with, expressing solidarity with, at least. That's component 3. I call it simplifying. Learning about, learning from, simplifying. Component 4. Component 4 is prayer, centering, meditation, keeping the perspective of what's important in life, focusing, listening to God and life, not always talking or doing, clearing a space, emptying, escaping the clutter and propaganda, getting back to base, the big picture, noting it's not up to me, giving over to him, her, it, them. How do you call your God? This is component 4, which I call centering. And finally, component 5, I call teaming up, putting 1, 2, 3, and 4 together jointly. That is, sharing all of the above, the 4 essential, or as many of as those as possible, with others. Fellowship, soulmates, finding those who have similar values, teamwork, unity, mutuality, for support and strength. Teaming up. Learning about, learning from, simplifying, centering, teaming up. Now I can trace only one person's pursuit of these 5 components. And I'm willing to do that, even though, like I said, I cringe a bit with some hesitation. And how they have appeared and disappeared in my life. Because they're the stuff of all of us, of our cultural resistance, our humanity as applied to our culture. So it begins for me in the early 60s with rumblings of an ecumenical council called Vatican II, the Young Christian Worker Movement in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Graduate school at Marquette, learning about component 1, learning about, Theology was becoming real and alive, connected to the world of people, lay people, poor people, third world people. The issues and the injustices of their lives was now on the agenda. So in 1964, this component, learning about a new kind of theology, became a full-time job for me, right here. I took a position as a rookie instructor in the Department of Theology. The first time in Dubuque. Hello, Father Vogel. Hello, Loras College. Lots of theory, trying to translate that theory into classes and courses. By 1968, the last of my doctoral work was behind me, and the novelty or the honeymoon of teaching was also. And I was still enthused, but less enthused, missing something. Something it felt. More than bald ideas. Eager now for some hands-on solidarity with the poor that I talked and talked and talked and talked about in the classroom. So, enter component 2. Learning from. I joined volunteer programs out of state every summer and found parish and local opportunities here in Dubuque as well. In 1973, since being with the poor continued to be a valuable, balancing kind of education for me, I took a step, a 2-year leave of absence from Loras. I did full-time food pantry, shelter home, parish, community work with Chicanos in southern Colorado. Jane and 2 young sons. It's an essential ingredient. Daily contact with how the real world lives. Yet, in 1975, I came back to Loras. Not an easy decision, but I was convinced that academic education also, if it's countercultural and challenging, is essential. The shelter home kind of work can be too Band-Aid-like, though it has its essential place as well. We also need to get to the root of the problem, which is the mindset of us, the me-first world. And there were still summers for me for this hands-on stuff, for balance. So through the late 70s and early 80s, I labored in the classroom from September to May, but I was convinced, still convinced, too convinced perhaps, that I could reason or theorize or persuade others to the truth I saw through my words. And it was so clear to me that I tended to be pushy and inflexible with you. Meanwhile, I'm still looking for action, more action for my daily life. And I find one, and I give it lots of importance, in fact, maybe too much importance. Simplified lifestyle, enter component 3. Walk everywhere, second-hand clothes, recycle everything, split my income with the poor, economize on water, electricity, budget, diet, all that stuff. But this can be a fixation or a tangent, eating beans in the basement in the dark. But I am too pushy about this also, and too hard on those around me. I keep asking, how does a middle-class family show its solidarity with the poor? That is, in one's daily way of living, in the home, at home. Simplified lifestyle is another big piece of the truth, but it can't be forced, and I feel the imbalance, and I'm running down. So by 1985, it's crisis time for me, both at home and also thousands of miles away from home, where I spend a sabbatical year off. At home, adolescent sons are having some growing up problems, and my spouse of 20 years is looking for a legal separation, and it hurts, it's painful. Meanwhile, I head for Nicaragua. Live in a war zone, drive an ambulance where 85% of the wars, so-called wars, casualties, are civilians with bullets in the back or to the temple, and I'm paying for those bullets. M16s and U.S. tax dollars and Reagan's Contra doing the job. And I get bowled over by danger and mortars and torture victims and landmines, and especially the injustice of U.S. policy punishing those beautiful people
who dared only to seek justice and self-determination just like we did 200 years before. I wasn't used to facing death every day of others, even friends of mine, and the prospect of my own any day. And thus a whole new perspective on mortality and the gift of life and providence and prayer and dependency vaguely started to appear. I tried to learn faith in God and others. Component 4, centering, and 5, teaming up, finally are becoming a little bit real to me. And Nicaraguan campesinos are showing me the way. I see how inhuman I am when I operate under the illusion of self-made or self-sufficient. Their crude theology of liberation is a gift to me. I experience an alternative way to live. Mutual support, it's the only way. I delight in the community I am part of there. Component 5. And I even get a taste of the power of prayer and meditation. I take daily time for it. It's not just a waste of time after all, this time of focusing or regaining perspective or sitting with God. Call it whatever you wish. It leads to living without worrying about results or success. It's faithfulness that counts. Shoveling snow with a few friends is great, but it doesn't make the snowstorm go away. So like being present at one's mother's deathbed, we are there to say something, not to change anything very much. The year ends, however. Goodbye, Nicaragua. But stay with me, please. In the late 80s and early 90s, back at Loras, I plowed on trying to root the seeds of 85 and 86 here in the U.S. It's harder, it's shaky, it's a holding pattern at best. I live alone, don't trust many here to be an ally. You wouldn't understand, you see. It's not your fault. Nobody's fault. You just haven't held emaciated, malnourished, dying children and spoken with their mothers and stood at the cemetery and seen the desperation. Nor have you filled trucks with bullet-ridden or blown-up pieces of human bodies, civilian bodies, villagers, old people, kids. All of this thanks to your tax dollars, my tax dollars. I try here to listen and share with others, but it's all kind of constipated. I return to Nicaragua every summer and between semesters with students. I come alive a little, finding home only when away from home. Not with many white, middle-class, tax-paying Christians from whom I want to hide in shame and in pain, denying my own sin. My teaching of Zen, Taoism, Eastern spirituality, that helps a little. Many Christians' God seems too small. Is Christianity the way or our way? Is it making us more human, or is it hindering us? Is it mostly a smoke screen of doctrine and obedience to arrogance and racism and colonialism? I just can't forget all those Nicaraguan kids and those bodies. How can we awaken us Christians to that truth? What are the 6 final exam questions? Once again, please. In 1993, I requested a sabbatical to look for a way to bridge us. See, only a few students and friends are able to travel and live in the 2/3 world. So what's the way for the rest of us? The traditional classroom isn't reaching them well enough. What more is there? There's got to be a better way to introduce students, to offer them an alternative model or way, a truer view of what is really what. And I'm hungry for community, too. That's component 5. Groups of people with similar values anywhere here in the U.S. who I can join in progress. Where are they? So in the summer of 1994, the sabbatical begins, this search. Thanks again, Bob, Department of Religious Studies. I'm off to look and to construct a program or a course I have named STAR, Studying Theology Through Action and Reflection. And here, Loras students will volunteer and experience the poor and the education or perspective that the poor can offer us. Why can't we? Why can't we combine component 1, learning about, with component 2, learning from? It's worth a try. So I've asked for academic credit, a proposal now before the Academic Council for this STAR experiment. The little old house on Lombard, home for 28 years, has been sold. No looking back now. First I'm off to Georgia with Jubilee Partners Refugee Program. An ecumenical community, strong on simplified lifestyle, that is so refreshing and necessary. Component 3. Good people doing good work. Here is one place everyone should have a chance to be a part of. Yet I must move on. In fall, I head for the Mexican border. There are overwhelming needs there, and the mistreatment of illegal, so-called illegal people is hard to take. You see, the nice, neat, controlled situation at Jubilee, Georgia, had given way to living like Don Quixote again, just me and my tiny 1977 RV against the whole ugly border mess. And even so-called Christian organizations with which I work include power abuses and oppression of the people that they purport to help. There seems to be no community for me here. I look ahead to January. Finally, it is January 1995, a new year, a new effort. CFCA, a great gang of people at the Kansas City headquarters. They assigned me to Guatemala, to a small town called San Pedro. Hurrah. But to work there alone. Uh-oh. Hey, where is this support team that I and they have promised me? But happily on to Guatemala anyway, and we have come full circle. We are back again to the dirty, old, but well-patched bus blasting its way much too fast through the night from Chiapas to Guatemala City. We're back again to a chance for a real education regarding justice. Component 1. Back to the physical reality of the poor. Component 2. Back to a simplified lifestyle. 3. Back to calmly trying to let happen whatever happens. 4. 4 components, more or less, but trying to get the right mix. And the missing 5th component. Where is that elusive ingredient, community? Teaming up. Digging in one last time before returning to the Midwest, where it's all more difficult. Knowing now, however, I'll need to give and get even more support back here, where there are so few Chapitos and Doña Solteras, and the kind of society that allows or encourages them. Knowing also that I won't do a very good job. Because it's so easy to get sucked back in, or for me, simultaneously scared off into hiding from this unreal land of comfort and affluence and security and things. In the United States, it's so easy for all of us to let ourselves be carried by the current toward a lack of interest in social justice, not learning about, toward living apart from contact with the poor, not learning from, toward a cluttered and consumeristic kind of lifestyle, toward the loss of our center in prayer and reflection, and toward superficial, entertainment-orientated community. Where's the team here? The community intent upon the reversal, the relinquishment, the conversion. Where to turn, where to probe, how to turn, how to probe, and most of all, with whom? How do we get it together? Where do we start? Then what do we do? How do we persevere, trust each other, pick up and start over? And who is this we? And can we do it the way of cultural resistance toward human wholeness? I am still looking, and I am still hoping. Let's end there with that word. I am still looking, and I am still hoping. God bless you all. Thank you very much. We have some time, 15 minutes, something like that, for comments. Some of the things I put in there were intentionally a bit provocative. So if anybody wants to comment, disagree, react, ask questions, perfectly legitimate. I see somebody way in the back standing up. Did he want to ask a question? That merry-go-round, anywhere you can get on and you'll see the whole circle. And so whatever your ministry, or whatever your pension, or whatever your abilities are, grab hold on that aspect and go for it. And I think sometimes we waste our energies by objectively trying to dispute what's the best place to start. And I say, what's the best place to get on a merry-go-round? You know, just get on and you'll get connected to the whole thing. So I agree completely with Ted. What he's saying there is another good way, and to each his own. And not like you have to take only one. Take as many as you can handle. I don't know if you're familiar, Ted has his own program which helps children in the Philippine Islands. And it's a good one, and maybe ask him. I'm sure he'd be willing to talk to him about it a little bit, wouldn't you, Ted? I mean, really, it's one of the real active possibilities here on this campus, where you can plug into something that gets help immediately to Filipino children.
Well, how do we, if I understood your sharings with us, how do we begin or participate in this school of cultural resistance? I mean, I think there are a lot of like-minded people around, and maybe we need to touch each other and get together as far as some of our ideas. And because I see, although it would be nice if we were so generous with our money and our policies in having capitalism work for the third world, but as you're suggesting, it's a matter of us changing our culture, and that we become more humane toward all people, and not that we continue a system that perhaps will benefit everyone. So I guess I could see something here, you know, at Loras. How do we help the students here participate in being countercultural? How do we support that? How do we create the community? How do we offer them the tools for a simple lifestyle? How do we teach them to pray, to support one another, and for us to support them? I guess I'm looking for, you know, besides having a sheet passed around, we all sign up for something, which I guess I'm willing to do, but...
Well, I hear you doing it at noon, you know. That's a small piece. I'm struggling at doing it in the classroom. That's a small piece. I know there are lots of people doing lots of different things, but you're right, we still need some more focal kind of a thing. And I think you have the answer sitting next to you. I think Mary Moody's idea of a Catholic worker house, where we can all pull together in some sort of location, because first of all, Catholic worker has contact with the poor. And I think that's the one that maybe in an academic community that escapes us so easily. And I spent a bunch of years working weekends at the Rescue Mission, and that to me was valuable. It's not the same as Latin America, but somehow you have to have the poor present. So I would think that's the only, not the only, but that's one thing missing, and I really feel optimistic about how that might be a way to pull the Loras community together around the Catholic worker community concept. I mean, it's the best I got to suggest anyway.
Paul, on behalf of all of us here at Loras and the audience here this evening, I want to thank you for your presentation this evening certainly has caused, you have asked enough questions for us to reflect on, and certainly those 6 questions that we're all going to have to answer on that final day need to be thought through by each and every one of us, and I appreciate the forthrightness in which you present the challenges for each and every one of us. So on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you. And lastly, Paul will be around for a while, and we have refreshments right outside here for everyone to partake of. Thank you again for coming this evening, and we look forward to you continuing to attend our lecture series. Thank you and good evening.